The bank teller slid my card back across the counter, then stopped breathing for a second. I had come in on my lunch break to cancel it. $1,000. That was the number my sister wrote on the envelope the night she took our parents' house and pushed me out the door because I was adopted. I almost threw the card in a trash can at the end of the driveway. I picked it back up. For 5 years, it sat in my wallet behind a grocery punch card, and now a stranger in a blue cardigan was looking at her screen like it had insulted her. What she said next is the reason my sister will never sleep the same again. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge, where the quiet ones finally get the last word, and the people who underestimated them learn what loyalty really costs. If a family ever made you feel like a guest in your own home, stay with me. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. My name is Sienna Thatcher, and I was 32 the day I learned what my parents really left me. But the story starts 5 years earlier, in a funeral home that smelled like carnations and floor wax. My mother had died in March. My father had gone the autumn before. I stood at the back of the room in a black dress I'd bought for my father's service, and worn again because I couldn't afford a second one. People I'd known my whole life filed past the casket. Some of them squeezed my hand. Most of them found my sister first. Marlene stood near the front like she'd been carved for the spot, accepting condolences with her chin up, her husband Doug at her elbow. I was the one who'd driven my mother to chemo. I was the one who slept in the hospital chair. But grief has a seating chart, and mine was in the last row. My Aunt Carol came down the aisle, patted my arm, and looked at me the way you look at a coat someone left behind. "Blood is blood, dear," she said, like she was doing me a kindness. I didn't understand yet why she'd say that to me, at my own mother's funeral. Marlene leaned in close as the room thinned out. Her perfume was the same one our mother used to wear. "We'll talk about arrangements tonight," she whispered. "The house, the accounts, all of it." She smiled when she said it. I thought she meant we'd handle it together. I was wrong about a lot of things back then, but I was most wrong about that smile. I came to the Thatchers when I was 4 years old. I don't remember the before. I remember the after. I remember my father teaching me to ride a bike on a gravel road, running behind me with one hand on the seat, lying when he let go so I wouldn't be scared. I remember my mother sewing my name into the collar of my winter coat so I'd never lose it. They were not rich. He drove a propane delivery truck. She kept the books for a feed store. But they made me feel like I'd been chosen on purpose, which is a different thing than being born into something. Marlene was 6 years older, and she remembered the before too. She remembered being an only child. I don't think anyone ever explained to her that love isn't a pie, that adding a plate doesn't mean someone gets less. So she counted. She counted every birthday, every Christmas, every time our mother sat on the edge of my bed instead of hers. I didn't know I was being counted. I was just a kid who finally had a family. One night, when I was maybe 9, my father pulled me onto the porch steps and pointed at the stars like he was about to say something important. "I've got something set aside for you, kiddo," he told me, "for when you're grown. So you'll always have a place to stand." I figured he meant a savings bond, the kind grandfathers give. I said thank you and forgot about it. You'll want to remember that he said it. I didn't. Not for a very long time. The family meeting happened in the kitchen where I'd done my homework for 14 years. Marlene sat at the head of the table. Doug stood behind her with his arms crossed. Aunt Carol took the chair by the window. There to witness, she said. So everything stayed fair. There was a folder on the table. I'd never seen it before. Marlene opened it like a banker, not a sister. "Dad updated his will when he got sick," she said. "I helped him with the paperwork. He wanted things simple." I asked to read it. She slid one page across, kept the rest. The page said the house, the land, and the accounts went to Marlene. My name was not on it. I sat very still. I had been in that house 6 months earlier, holding our father's hand while he could barely lift a spoon. He had not been in any shape to read fine print, let alone update a will. "When did he sign this?" I asked. Marlene's jaw tightened. "Are you accusing me of something?" Doug shifted his weight. Carol murmured that grief makes people say ugly things. I wasn't accusing. I was asking. There is a difference, and watching the three of them close ranks taught me which one they were afraid of. I asked if I could have a copy. Marlene said the lawyer had the originals and I could take it up with him. She knew I didn't have the money for a lawyer. We both knew. The folder closed. The kitchen clock ticked. And I realized the meeting had never been a meeting. It was an eviction with a nicer name. Then Marlene reached into the folder and pulled out an envelope. She held it a moment, like she was deciding whether I'd earned it. "Mom and Dad wanted you to have something too," she said. Her voice softened, and for one stupid second I thought maybe I'd misjudged the whole night. I took the envelope. It was thin. Inside was a bank card, plain and blue, and a folded note in my father's shaky handwriting that said only, "For Sienna." Paper-clipped to it was a second note in Marlene's neat print, $1,000, your share. I looked up. $1,000, I said. It wasn't a question, it was the sound of something breaking quietly. "It's more than fair," Doug said, considering. I asked him, considering what? Marlene answered for him. She stood, smoothed her slacks, and looked at me with our mother's eyes and a stranger's heart. "Considering you were never really one of us." There it was. The thing they'd all been thinking for 30 years, finally said out loud in the kitchen with the homework table. Aunt Carol studied her hands. Nobody argued with Marlene. Nobody ever did. I held the card and the note, and I felt the floor of my life tilt sideways. 27 years of belonging, reduced to a number someone had written in pen. I kept my face still in front of them. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction, but I want you to know that a card can weigh 100 pounds if it's the price someone puts on your whole childhood. They wanted me gone that night. Not in a week. That night. Marlene said it would be cleaner, that drawing it out would only hurt everyone, by which she meant her. I went up to the room that had been mine since kindergarten. The walls still had the faint rectangles where my posters used to hang. I packed one suitcase, a few clothes, my nursing license, a photograph of my mother and me at my graduation, both of us squinting into the sun. I left the furniture. I left the trophies. I left the bed. Some things you can't fit in a suitcase, and some things you don't want to carry into the next part of your life anyway. When I came down, my niece Bria was sitting on the bottom stair in her pajamas. She was 4 then, all elbows and tangled hair, and she didn't understand any of it except that Aunt Sienna had a suitcase. She grabbed my hand with both of hers. "Don't go," she said. Children always know when something is wrong before the adults will admit it. I knelt and told her I'd see her again, which I hoped was true. Marlene pulled her back by the shoulder. Doug opened the front door. The porch light my father installed clicked on, the way it had every night of my childhood, sensing someone coming home. Except I was going the other way. I walked to the end of the driveway with my suitcase, past the trash cans waiting for morning pickup, and I stopped. The card was in my coat pocket, and I thought, I should throw this away. I actually did it. I dropped the card into the trash can on top of the coffee grounds and the funeral flowers somebody had already thrown out. It felt good for about 4 seconds. Then it felt like quitting. I stood there in the cold with my breath fogging up, and I told myself it was $1,000 and $1,000 buys 2 months of rent. But that wasn't why I reached back in. I reached back in because of the note. For Sienna. My father wrote that. Not Marlene. His hand had shaped those letters when his hands could barely hold a fork. Whatever the card was worth, the note was the last thing he ever made for me, and I'd almost left it with the garbage because my sister taught me to. I wiped the coffee grounds off on my coat. I turned the card over in the porch light one more time, and that's when I saw it. On the back, below the magnetic strip, in pencil so faint I'd missed it, more of my father's handwriting. A short line. "When you're ready, walk in." I didn't know what it meant. I assumed he meant walk into the bank, withdraw your $1,000, start your life. I put the card back in my wallet behind a grocery punch card where it would stay for 5 years. I picked up my suitcase and I walked. Not home, because I didn't have one anymore. Just away. And here's the part Marlene never considered. When you take everything from someone, you also take away their reason to ever do what you tell them again. That first week, I slept in the on-call room at the hospital where I worked, the one with the cot and the vending machine that ate quarters. The night charge nurse pretended not to notice. By the second week, I'd rented a room above a hardware store in Brockton, the next town over, 20 minutes from everything I used to be. It had a hot plate and a window that looked at a brick wall, and it was mine, which made it a palace. I tried once to fight. I called a legal aid office and explained it all. The deathbed will, the sister who helped with the paperwork, the page with my name missing. The woman on the phone was kind and honest, which is a brutal combination. Adopted children in Ohio inherit exactly like biological children, she told me, but only when there's no valid will. If there was a will, even a suspicious one, I'd need to contest it. That meant a handwriting expert, a forensic review of the signature, court filings, and a retainer that started at $5,000. There was also a clock, a window to challenge it, and it was already half gone. I had $1,100 to my name, counting the card I assumed was worth 1,000 of it. I asked if there was any way to do it cheaper. She said she was sorry. I believed her. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I went back to work. I picked up doubles. I told myself the law was a door, and some doors only open for people who can pay the toll. I didn't know yet that my father had built me a different door entirely. I worked doubles back then until my feet forgot what it felt like to not hurt. I picked up every shift nobody wanted, the holidays, the overnights, the units where the call lights never stopped. If you've ever rebuilt your life out of one suitcase, you already know the strange thing about it. There's grief in it, but there's also a clean kind of quiet, because no one can take what you build with your own two hands. Stay with me, because what I built is the reason the ending lands the way it does. I started studying for my critical care certification on my breaks, flashcards rubber-banded in my locker. I'd read them in the cafeteria at 2 in the morning while the coffee went cold. One of the older nurses, a woman named Pat, who'd seen everything twice, told me I had the look. I asked her what look. The one that's done being small, she said. I didn't feel done being small. I felt like someone who'd been thrown away and was just trying not to land. But I kept the card in my wallet, and every time I opened it to pay for gas or a sandwich, I saw the corner of it, blue behind the punch card, and I'd hear my father's voice on the porch steps. Something set aside for you, so you'll always have a place to stand. I didn't have the place yet, but I had the promise, in his handwriting, and some nights that was the only thing that held the floor up under me. News from the old town still found me, the way it does in places where everyone went to the same high school. Marlene was renovating. She posted photos of the homestead with new shutters and a kitchen island the size of a rowboat. So grateful for family, she wrote under one of them, which would have been funny if it hadn't made my chest ache. People I barely knew tagged me in the comments, asking if that was my old place. I stopped looking. Then the photos changed. The back 40. The strip of land my father used to call the back pasture even though we never had cattle, went up for sale. I knew that field. I'd learned to ride a bike on the road beside it. Selling it didn't fit the story Marlene was telling about being the loyal daughter who kept the homestead whole. Something was wrong with the math. A few weeks later, Doug's name showed up in the county legal notices, the small print nobody reads, tied to a business creditor and a payment plan. So that was it. Doug's contracting company was underwater, and the inheritance they'd shoved me out the door for was already being sold off in pieces to keep his head above it. I felt a lot of things. I'd love to tell you I felt nothing but peace. The truth is uglier and more human than that. Part of me wanted to drive over and watch, but I'd learned something in those rooms above the hardware store. You don't have to throw the punch when a person is already falling. You just have to be standing somewhere they can see you, still on your feet. About a year into Brockton, I had a hard month. The hot plate died, the car needed brakes, and rent came due all in the same week. I thought about the card. $1,000 would have been a life raft. So one night I sat down at the library computer and tried to use it. I typed in the long number on the front. I entered the expiration date. The screen thought about it, then spat back an error. This card is not enabled for online transactions. Please visit a branch. I tried twice more. Same thing. I figured it was just old, one of those cards banks issue and forget about. The account probably long dormant. $1,000 I couldn't even reach, without taking a day off work to drive back to a town that had thrown me out. I almost laughed. Even the parting gift came with a catch. I put the card back in my wallet and picked up another double instead, and I made rent the honest way, the slow way. What I didn't understand then, and wouldn't for 4 more years, was that the error message wasn't a malfunction. It was a lock. Some cards are built so they can only be activated in person, by the named owner, with identification, at a counter, in front of a human being. My father, who delivered propane for a living and read every contract twice, had asked the bank for exactly that. He'd built a door that only opened one way, from the inside, by me, in person. He just never got the chance to tell me before he died, so the door waited. And so, without knowing it, did I. 2 years in, my phone rang from a number I didn't know. A small voice said, "Aunt Sienna?" It was Bria. She was 6 now, and she'd memorized my number off a Christmas card I'd mailed and never heard back about. She wasn't supposed to be calling. I could tell by how quiet she kept her voice, the way kids do when they're hiding in a closet with the door cracked. We talked about her gerbil and her teacher and a book she liked. Then, the way children drop the real thing in the middle of the small things, she said. "Mommy and Daddy fight about money a lot now. Daddy yells. Mommy cries in the laundry room." I asked if she was okay. She said she was. I asked if anyone ever yelled at her. She said no, just at each other. And I believed her. And I filed it away, because the first thing I promised myself when I left that house was that whatever happened between the adults, no child in that family would ever be made to feel like a coat left behind. Not on my watch. Before she hung up, Bria asked me something that stuck. "Did you do something bad? Is that why you went away?" I told her no, honey, I didn't do anything bad. Some people just decide there's not enough room, and the only thing you can do is go find a bigger house. She thought about that. "Your house is bigger?" she asked. I looked around my one room above the hardware store. "It's getting there," I said. After she hung up, I sat in the dark a long time, wondering where all that money was going, since they'd taken the house and the land and the accounts, and it still wasn't enough. In my 3rd year at the hospital, they wheeled in a woman with chest pains, and it took me a full minute to recognize my Aunt Carol under the oxygen mask. She'd aged a decade. I was her nurse for 2 nights, because that's how small towns work. The people who wrote you off end up depending on the steadiness of your hands. I did my job. I checked her vitals, adjusted her meds, brought her ginger ale at 3 in the morning when she couldn't sleep. On the 2nd night, she watched me work for a while and then said quietly, "You're good at this." I said thank you. She was quiet again. Then she said the thing I think she'd been carrying. "Your father changed that will twice, you know." I was there for the first one. I kept my face still, the way you learn to in nursing. I asked her what she meant. She looked at the ceiling. "The first version had your name all over it. Then he got sick. Then Marlene got involved." She stopped there, like she'd said more than she meant to. I wanted to grab her by the shoulders. I didn't. I checked her IV and asked, as evenly as I could, if she'd ever seen the final one signed. She said no. She said by the end she'd stopped going to that house. For the first time, I understood that Aunt Carol wasn't a villain so much as a coward, and that there's a difference, though it doesn't help the person you fail to stand up for. She squeezed my hand before her daughter took her home. "Blood is blood," she said again. But this time it sounded less like a verdict and more like an apology she didn't know how to finish. A week after Carol went home, a man named Earl knocked on my door above the hardware store. He'd been my parents' next-door neighbor for 30 years, and he'd tracked me down through Pat at the hospital. He had a cardboard box in his arms. "Your mama gave me this to hold the spring before she passed," he said. "Made me promise I'd get it to you, not to anyone else. Took me a while to find you." I made him coffee on the new hot plate. After he left, I sat on the floor and opened the box. It was my mother's things, the small ones. A church cookbook, a pair of reading glasses, the pincushion shaped like a tomato. And at the bottom, in an envelope with my name on it, a letter she'd written and never mailed. I read it 4 times. She told me she was sorry she got sick before she could fix what she felt coming. She told me she knew Marlene was counting again. That's the word she used, counting, like she'd always known. And then she wrote the part I would carry with me for 2 more years without understanding it. "If Marlene ever shuts the door on you, don't fight her for the house. Let her have the walls. Remember the card your father gave you. Walk in yourself, in person, when you're ready. It only opens for you." I read that line out loud in my empty room. It only opens for you. I thought she was being poetic, a mother telling her daughter that her life only opened when she stopped waiting for permission. I didn't think it was literal. I took the card out of my wallet and held it next to the letter, my father's faint pencil on the back lining up with my mother's words like 2 halves of something. "When you're ready, walk in." I wasn't ready. Not yet. I had a certification to finish and a life to build, and a sister I was trying very hard not to think about. So I put the letter and the card together in the cookbook, and I kept living. But I never forgot that line again. You might be wondering why I didn't drive straight to the bank the next morning. I've asked myself that too. Part of it was practical. The card said $1,000, and a day off to chase $1,000 I might not even be able to claim felt like a luxury I couldn't justify. Part of it was the letter. My mother said, "When you're ready." And somewhere in me, I knew I wasn't. Not yet. Not as the woman who still flinched when a certain perfume walked past in the grocery store. I didn't want to walk into that bank as the girl who got thrown out. I wanted to walk in as someone. There's a kind of pride that looks like procrastination from the outside, and maybe that's what it was. But I think it was something closer to instinct. My father said, "When you're grown." My mother said, "When you're ready." Twice they used the same word for time, like they trusted that I'd know the moment when it came. So I let the card sit in the cookbook. I finished my certification. I got hired onto the cardiac unit. I started saving, $100 at a time, in an account that was small but entirely mine, with no one's name on it but my own. The card became less of a wound and more of a question I'd answer eventually. Some keys you're not supposed to turn until you've become the person the lock was waiting for. I didn't know that's what it was. But I was becoming her anyway, one double shift at a time, and the lock was patient. It had already waited through a funeral. It could wait a little longer for me to grow into the answer. 5 years. That's how long it took me to become someone I'd have been proud to introduce to my parents. By then I was a charge nurse on the cardiac unit, the one the new hires came to with their shaking hands and their hard questions. I'd left the room above the hardware store for a real apartment, a 1-bedroom with a balcony big enough for 2 chairs and a tomato plant I grew from my mother's pincushion seeds. Or at least, that's the story I told myself. I had a savings account with 4 figures that didn't make me sweat. I had a coworker named Dana I ate lunch with, and a standing Tuesday call with Bria, who was 9 now and allowed to call me openly, because Marlene had bigger problems than policing her daughter's phone. I had a life. Not a big one. A true one. I want to be honest with you about something, because this is the part people skip. The revenge in this story isn't the money. It's the 5 years. It's becoming a woman who could lose a house and a family and a name and still build a balcony with 2 chairs on it. By the time I found the card again, I genuinely didn't need it. That's what made what happened next so strange. I wasn't looking for a windfall. I was just cleaning out my wallet, the way you do when the leather finally gives out, transferring cards one by one into a new one. And there it was. Blue, scuffed, 5 years old. My father's pencil on the back, almost gone now. When you're ready, walk in. I sat down on the edge of my bed and I realized something. For the first time since the funeral, I actually was. The same week I found the card, the homestead went up for sale. The whole thing this time, not just the back pasture. Bria told me first, in her matter-of-fact 9-year-old way. "We're moving to an apartment," she said. "Daddy's company closed. Mommy says we don't need a big house anyway." I asked how her mom was doing. There was a pause. "She's mad all the time," Bria said. I saw the listing later online. The house with the new shutters and the rowboat island. The kitchen where they'd handed me an envelope and called me a stranger, priced to move fast. Doug's business had finally gone all the way under, and the inheritance they'd evicted me to protect had been spent and borrowed against, and was now being liquidated to settle the wreckage. Everything they'd taken, gone in 5 years. I thought I'd feel triumphant. Mostly I felt tired. The specific tiredness of watching people destroy something you would have given anything to keep. They'd had the house. They'd had the land. They'd had the accounts and each other and the whole story of being the real family, and they'd run it into the ground. I closed the listing. I looked at the card sitting on my nightstand, and I thought, well, I should probably do something with that. Not for the $1,000. I had more than that now. But because cleaning up loose ends is what grown women do, and because there was a closed account out there with my name on it, gathering dust, and I'd carried it long enough. I decided I'd go cancel it, drive back to the old town on my day off, walk into the bank, close the account, and finally be done. That was the whole plan. Close it. Be done. The universe had other ideas. I almost canceled the only thing my parents ever left me, over the phone, without ever knowing what it was. I actually called the bank's customer line first, to save myself the drive. The automated system asked for the card number, then said the account required in-person verification for any changes. Of course it did. Everything about this card required walking in. So on a Thursday off, I put on real clothes, not scrubs, a blazer I'd bought myself for job interviews, and I drove the 40 minutes back to the town that raised me and then returned me. Before you throw away the thing that hurt you, I want you to hear what the teller told me, because I came within one signature of never knowing. If you've ever kept something you couldn't explain, something that survived every purge of your life because some quiet part of you wasn't done with it, leave a comment and tell me what it was. I drove past the high school, past the feed store where my mother kept the books, past the road where my father ran behind my bike. The bank was a small brick branch on Main Street, the same one where my parents had banked for 40 years, the kind of place where the tellers know 3 generations of your family. I parked. I sat in the car a minute with the card in my hand and my father's almost gone pencil under my thumb. "When you're ready, walk in." "Okay, Dad," I said out loud, to nobody. "I'm ready. I'm walking in." I had no idea I was about to. I thought I was closing a door. I was finally opening one. The branch smelled like carpet and old money, the way small banks do. There was a line of 3 people. A teller window with a young woman in a blue cardigan, maybe 25, name tag that said Hannah. When it was my turn, I slid the card across the counter and said the most anticlimactic sentence of my life. "Hi, I'd like to close this account, please." Hannah picked up the card, friendly, professional, already reaching for her keyboard. "Sure thing. Can I see your ID?" I gave her my license. She typed in the card number, and then she stopped. Her smile didn't fall exactly. It just sort of froze, like a photo of a smile. She looked at the screen. She looked at my ID. She looked at the screen again. She typed something, waited, and her eyebrows went up. "One moment," she said, in a voice that was trying very hard to stay casual and failing. She slid off her stool. "I'm just going to grab my manager." I felt my stomach drop, the way it does when the doctor says, "Let's run that test again." I figured the account was flagged or frozen, or that somehow Marlene had gotten to it, that this was going to be one more door slammed in my face. I almost told Hannah, "Never mind, forget it. I'll go." But my father's pencil was under my thumb. "Walk in." So I stood there at the counter with 3 strangers in line behind me, my heart doing something complicated, and I waited for the manager. Hannah came back with an older woman in a gray suit, reading glasses on a chain, the kind of face that has signed 1,000 documents and seen a few things it never talks about. The woman looked at the screen. Then she looked at me, and something in her face changed. "You're Walter Thatcher's girl," the manager said. It wasn't a question. Her name tag said Eleanor Pruitt, branch manager, and her voice had gone soft in a way that made the back of my neck prickle. I said yes. I said I was Sienna. She took her glasses off and looked at me for a long moment, like she was matching my face to a memory. "I handled your father's accounts for 22 years, she said. "I was at his funeral." I didn't remember her there, but then I'd spent that day in the back row. "He came in here about 8 months before he passed," she went on, "before he got too sick to drive. He set something up, and he was very particular about how it had to work." My mouth had gone dry. I asked her what she meant. Mrs. Pruitt glanced at the line behind me, then at Hannah. "Let's talk in my office," she said. "Hannah, hold my window." She led me past the counter to a small office with a wooden desk and a window onto Main Street. She gestured for me to sit. She sat across from me, folded her hands, and slid the blue card to the center of the desk between us, like it was something we both needed to look at. "Miss Thatcher," she said, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to think before you answer. Has anyone ever told you what this card actually is?" I said the only thing I knew. "My sister said it was worth $1,000. Mrs. Pruitt was quiet for a moment. Then she did something I did not expect. She almost smiled, but it was a sad smile, the kind you give someone who's been lied to for a long time and is about to find out. $1,000, Mrs. Pruitt repeated slowly, like she was tasting how wrong it was. "Is that what she told you?" She turned her monitor toward me. I couldn't read the numbers from my angle, and honestly, my eyes wouldn't focus anyway. She folded her hands again and looked me dead in the eye. "This isn't a $1,000 card, honey. It's the access card to a trust your parents opened in your name, and it only opens for you. It only opens for you." My mother's exact words, in my mother's exact handwriting, said out loud by a stranger in a gray suit. The room tilted, the same way the kitchen had 5 years before, except this time it was tilting the other direction. I asked her to say it again. She did. She explained it the way you explain something to a person in shock, slowly, in small pieces. My father had opened the account when I was a child. Over the years he'd fed it, a little at a time, the way a propane delivery driver saves. $20 here, a tax refund there. He'd made it payable on death to me alone, with a clause that the account could only be accessed in person by the named beneficiary with valid identification. Not online, not by phone, not by anyone holding the card who wasn't me. "The $1,000 your sister saw," Mrs. Pruitt said, "was probably the balance on the linked checking sub-account, the part that shows on a quick statement. She'd have had no way to see the rest without your ID standing right here. And she never could have. It was built, so she couldn't." I sat very still. I thought about Marlene handing me the envelope like it was charity. I thought about the trash can at the end of the driveway, the coffee grounds, how close I'd come. "How much," I finally asked, "is the rest?" Mrs. Pruitt turned the monitor a few more degrees toward me, and I read the number my father had spent my whole childhood building, the place to stand he'd promised me on the porch steps, the door that only opened from the inside, by me, when I was ready. "I'm not going to perform the number for you like a game show. I'll tell you, it was the kind of number that makes a nurse who counts in $20 bills go very quiet. It was years of a careful man's savings, plus the part I didn't know about yet." Mrs. Pruitt slid a second document across the desk. My father had also held a small life insurance policy through the bank, and 8 months before he died, he had changed the beneficiary. It used to name my mother. Then, when my mother got her own diagnosis, he'd changed it again. To me. Only me. "He came in alone both times," Mrs. Pruitt said. "Drove himself. He told me, and I remember this because it stuck with me, he said, 'My older one will be fine. She counts everything. This one gives everything away. I want to make sure she's got something nobody can talk her out of. I had to look out the window for a minute. Main Street went on with its Thursday, a truck idling, a woman walking a dog. The whole ordinary world that didn't know my father had just reached across 5 years and a grave to put his hand on the back of my bike seat one more time. Here is the part that mattered legally, and Mrs. Pruitt was careful to explain it. A payable on death account and a named insurance beneficiary do not pass through a will. They are not part of the estate. It would not have mattered if Marlene's deathbed will was real or forged, valid or not. These two things were mine the moment my parents named me, and no document Marlene ever touched could reach them. She had handed me the single most valuable thing my parents owned, called it $1,000, and thrown me out for being adopted. And she had no idea. I didn't celebrate. I want to be honest about that, because the movies get this part wrong. I sat in that little office and I cried, finally, 5 years late, but not for the reason you'd think. I wasn't crying about the money. I was crying because my father knew. He knew exactly who Marlene was, and exactly who I was. And instead of confronting her, or lecturing me, or trying to fix a family that couldn't be fixed, he just quietly built me a place to stand and trusted me to find it when I was ready. Something set aside for you, kiddo. The porch steps. The stars. I'd been 9 years old, and I'd thought he meant a savings bond. Mrs. Pruitt handed me a box of tissues without a word, the way you do when you've been a banker in a small town long enough to also be a priest. When I could talk again, I asked her why my mother's letter said, "It only opens for you." She said that was the whole design. Your father didn't trust a will. Wills get contested, changed, lost. He wanted something that could only ever be claimed by you, standing here, being you. He told me, no lawyer, no sister, no judge. Just her, when she walks in. I thought about all the years the card sat in my wallet, behind a grocery punch card, while I worked doubles and made rent the slow way and built a balcony with 2 chairs. The whole time, this was waiting. Not as a rescue. As a reward for becoming someone who didn't need rescuing. I dried my face. I asked Mrs. Pruitt what I needed to do to access it. She smiled, the real way this time. You already did the hard part, she said. You walked in. Small towns leak. I'd signed 2 forms and Mrs. Pruitt had started the paperwork, and somewhere between the bank and the parking lot, someone who knew someone mentioned that Walter Thatcher's younger girl had been in about an account. By the time I got back to Brockton, my phone was lit up with a number I'd blocked years ago and apparently unblocked in a weak moment. Marlene. I let it ring twice and answered on the third, the way you pick up a snake you've decided you're no longer afraid of. Her voice was honey. I hadn't heard that voice since before the funeral. Sienna. Oh my goodness, it's been forever. How are you? I said I was fine. She said she'd been meaning to reach out for years, that the way things ended was such a hard time for everyone, that grief makes people do things. I said nothing, which is a thing I'd learned to do. Into my silence, she got to the point, the way she always did. I heard you were at the bank. Listen, whatever Mom and Dad left, we should really sit down as a family and figure out the fair thing. We're blood. We share. There it was. 5 years ago, I was never really one of them. Now, with a number on a screen somewhere, we were blood and we share. I almost laughed. I didn't. I asked her one question, calm as a Tuesday. Marlene, do you remember what you wrote on the envelope? The honey wavered. What envelope? The one with the card. You wrote your share, $1,000. My share. Silence on her end now. I'm just trying to do right by family, she said finally, and her voice had gone thin. I told her I'd meet her, at the bank, with the manager, Friday. And I hung up before she could choose the location herself. I could have just taken the money and never spoken to her again. That was the easy path, and part of me wanted it, but I'd spent 5 years being the person things happened to, the one who got handed an envelope and a verdict in a kitchen with no witnesses but the people delivering it. This time, I wanted witnesses, not to gloat. To close the loop the way it had been opened, out loud, in a room, with other people there to see the truth land. My weapon was never going to be Marlene's weapon. She dealt in private rooms and rewritten paperwork, and things said where no one else could hear. So I would do the opposite. I'd say the true thing in the most public, least deniable way I could, in the lobby of the bank where our father had quietly outsmarted her, in front of the manager who'd watched him do it. I called Mrs. Pruitt and asked if it would be all right to handle the final paperwork Friday morning, and if my sister happened to be there, whether Mrs. Pruitt would mind explaining the account exactly as she'd explained it to me. There was a pause on the line, and then that small dry note in her voice that I was coming to love. "Miss Thatcher," she said, "in 22 years I never got to tell Walter Thatcher how much I admired what he set up. I would be honored to explain it, accurately, to anyone who asks." I thanked her. I hung up. I sat on my balcony with the tomato plant and the 2 chairs, one of them empty, and I let myself imagine my father in it, and I told him I was finally ready to walk in all the way. Friday, I drove back one more time. They were already there when I arrived, all 3 of them, like the family meeting reassembled 5 years later in worse clothes. Marlene in a blazer that had seen better seasons, Doug heavier and grayer, the swagger gone out of him, and Aunt Carol, frailer than the night I'd nursed her, sitting in one of the lobby chairs with her purse on her knees. Marlene came at me with her arms open, performing a hug for the lobby. I stepped back, just slightly, and offered my hand instead. She covered the snub with a laugh. "Look at you," she said. "So professional." She'd dressed for an audience, and she'd brought one. 2 of the tellers had stopped pretending not to watch. An older couple at the loan desk glanced over. Marlene launched in, and she'd clearly rehearsed it. How we were all each other had left. How Mom and Dad would want their girls together. How whatever was in that account should be divided fairly, 3 ways even, to include Bria's future. She was good. If you didn't know her, you'd have teared up. Doug nodded along. Carol stared at her purse. Marlene finished with her hand pressed to her chest. "We're family, Sienna. We share. That's what Mom and Dad believed." And there it was. The daisy cutter turned inside out. 5 years ago, you were never really one of us. Today, with a number in the room, we're family. We share. I looked at her for a moment. I wasn't angry, which surprised me. Anger is what you feel when you still want something from someone. I didn't want anything from Marlene anymore. I asked her, very quietly, to wait 1 second. I walked to the counter where Mrs. Pruitt was already standing, and I asked if she'd join us. Then I took the letter out of my bag. My mother's letter, the one Earl carried across 2 years and a promise. I unfolded it on the little lobby table between us, smoothed it flat, and I did the only thing I'd come to do. I read 1 line out loud, just one, in the steadiest voice I owned. "It only opens for you." Then I looked up at my sister. "Mom wrote that, about this card. The one you told me was worth $1,000. Marlene's smile held, but her eyes started moving. Fast, the way they used to when our father caught her in something. I kept my voice level. I didn't raise it once. "Dad opened an account for me when I was a kid. Payable on death. To me alone. By law, it was never part of the estate, Marlene. It was never in any will, real or otherwise. It couldn't be touched by the house, the land, the paperwork you helped Dad sign when he couldn't hold a spoon. None of it. It was mine the day he named me." I turned to Mrs. Pruitt. "Would you tell them how it works?" And Mrs. Pruitt, God bless her steady banker's heart, explained it to the whole lobby in plain words. Named beneficiary. In-person access only. Bypasses the estate entirely. Mr. Thatcher set it up so that no one but his daughter, standing right here with her ID, could ever access it, she said. He was very specific. He told me he wanted his younger girl to have something nobody could talk her out of. The lobby was silent. Doug's face had gone the color of paste, and Marlene, who had spent 5 years as the loyal blood daughter who kept the homestead and ran it into the ground, finally cracked. "That's not fair." Her voice tore loose and climbed. "I took care of them. I was there. You were never even really ours, and he gives you—" She caught herself a half-second too late. The word ours rang off the marble floor. The older couple at the loan desk looked away. A teller put her hand over her mouth. Carol closed her eyes. Marlene stood there in the wreckage of the thing she'd just said in public, in the bank, in front of everyone. And I watched her understand that she'd finally told the truth at the exact moment it cost her everything. I didn't gloat. I just said the quietest true thing I had. "They didn't leave it to the family, Marlene. They left it to the daughter you threw out. I came here so you'd hear it from me, and not from a lawyer." Nobody moved for a moment. Then Doug, of all people, sat down heavily in a lobby chair and put his face in his hands, and I understood he was doing the math I'd already done. They'd sold the back pasture cheap to cover his debts. They'd borrowed against the house. They'd liquidated everything in the estate to stay afloat, every asset Marlene's paperwork had secured. And the whole time, the single most valuable thing my parents owned had been riding around in my wallet behind a grocery punch card, untouchable, just out of their reach by my father's careful design. They hadn't just lost a fight over an inheritance. They'd spent years destroying the part they could reach, while the part that mattered sat locked behind a door only I could open. Marlene wasn't yelling anymore. The fight had gone out of her all at once, the way it does when a person realizes the audience saw everything. "You could have told me," she said weakly, "when you found out." I thought about that. "You mean the way you told me, in the kitchen, that I was never really one of you?" She didn't answer. Aunt Carol stood up then, slow, both hands on her purse. She crossed the lobby and stopped in front of me, and for a second I thought she was going to defend Marlene one last time. Instead, she said, so quietly only I could hear, "He did love you, in his way. I should have said so years ago. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But I'd learned that you can accept an apology without reopening the door it's knocking on." I nodded. I told her to take care of her heart, and I meant it as a nurse and as a niece, both. Then I turned back to Mrs. Pruitt, and I signed the last form, and I closed the loop my father opened on a porch step 20 years before. Marlene watched me sign. She didn't say goodbye. There was nothing left to count. I didn't buy a mansion. People always ask, like the ending of a story like this should be a bigger house. I kept my apartment with the balcony for another year, because I'd earned every square foot of it, and I wasn't going to let a number change who I'd become to get there. What I did do was this. I set up a small scholarship at the county high school, in my parents' names, for kids who came into their families the way I came into mine, by choice, instead of by birth. The Walter and Grace Thatcher Fund. Every spring it pays for books and fees for one adopted or foster kid who's the first in their family to go to college. My father saved $20 at a time so I'd have a place to stand. I figured the right thing to do with a place to stand is build one for somebody else. I also opened an account for Bria, quietly, the in-person, named beneficiary kind, the kind nobody can talk her out of. She's 9, and someday when she's grown and maybe pushed out by people who decide there isn't enough room, she'll find out her Aunt Sienna left her a door that only opens from the inside. I never reconciled with Marlene. I want to be clear about that, because forgiveness gets sold as a tidy bow, and it isn't always. I don't wish her harm. I don't wish her anything. We exchange nothing now, which is its own kind of peace. Doug and Marlene moved into that apartment. Last I heard, they were still counting, still short, still telling whoever would listen that I'd somehow cheated them out of family money, which is a remarkable thing to say about an account that had my name on it before either of us understood what it was. I let them say it. People who keep score always lose track of the real total. As for me, I planted more tomatoes. I put a second chair on the balcony and stopped pretending it was empty. And every now and then, when a new nurse comes to me with shaking hands, I tell her the thing Pat once told me. You can tell the ones who are done being small. They walk in. Blood decides who you're related to. Love decides who you belong to. And mine had my name on it the whole time, waiting behind a grocery punch card for me to become the woman who could finally walk in and claim it. If anyone ever handed you the scraps and told you to be grateful, pick the card back up. The $1,000 lie. The letter that only opened for me. The sister who learned the truth at the worst possible moment to say it out loud. Hold the line, build your balcony, and walk in when you're ready. If this story reached you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment about what you've kept